A merchant prince is erased from history. His assets are stripped by the state, and the official records go conveniently missing. This is not just a mystery, it is a blueprint for how an empire dismantled African wealth. Today, we are diving into the archives to prove that the missing millionaire of Lagos was not simply lost to time. He was the victim of a calculated colonial judicial hit. To understand what happened to this man, you first need to understand the world he lived in. And it was a world unlike anything most history books would tell you about. By the 1880s and 1890s, Lagos was one of the most cosmopolitan cities on the African continent. A British crown colony, yes, but far more than a colonial outpost. It was a thriving port city where multiple worlds collided. The indigenous Yoruba chiefs and traders who had walked these waters for generations. The Saro, formerly enslaved Yoruba people, freed in Sierra Leone, returned home. Educated in British mission schools, and the Aguda, Afro-Brazilians, descendants of freed slaves from Brazil, who brought with them skills in architecture, construction, and commerce. Together, these communities created something remarkable. A black merchant class of extraordinary ambition and wealth. Men who owned ships, men who traded across the Niger Delta and deep into the interior, men who published newspapers and demanded political representation, men who built the city of Lagos with their own hands and their own capital. And at the very top of this world stood one man, a man whose name has been almost completely erased from the history books. Richard Beale Blaize, born in Freetown, Sierra Leone in 1845, to a Crowley family of emancipated Yoruba slaves. He arrived in Lagos in 1862, a young man of just 17, with nothing but ambition and a printer's apprenticeship behind him. He started as a printer, working for Robert Campbell, editor of the Anglo-African newspaper. But Blaize had his eyes on something much bigger. Within a few years, he had pivoted entirely, leaving the press behind to enter the world of merchandise, trading, and direct importation. He was extraordinarily good at it. While other traders competed primarily in the Lagos market, Blaize extended his reach deep into the interior, sending his own boats up the Niger River to buy goods directly from communities that European firms could not easily access. He was one of a select group of Lagos merchants who owned their own steamers, private merchant vessels on the Niger. He was not a middleman, he was building an empire. By the 1880s, Richard Beale Blaize had become one of the wealthiest West Africans of his generation. He was included in the European Lagos Chamber of Commerce in 1888, one of the only African men to sit alongside the British merchants who controlled the colony's commercial affairs. But Blaize was not content with commercial power alone. In 1880, he founded the Lagos Times and Gold Coast Colony Advertiser. When that folded in 1883, he launched the Lagos Weekly Record, a newspaper that became a platform for African political consciousness. Through his papers, he demanded more education for Africans, better representation in colonial governance. He pushed publicly for the separation of Lagos colony from the Gold Coast, a political outcome that eventually came in 1886. This was a man the British colonial establishment could not easily ignore. He was too wealthy, too connected, too vocal, and that, as history would show, made him a target. The 1890s were a pivotal decade in the history of Lagos. Britain's colonial ambitions were accelerating rapidly. The scramble for Africa was in full force. European powers carving up an entire continent between them, and the British Crown had clear strategic interest in West Africa. Monopolize trade, control the ports, and systematically eliminate competition from indigenous merchants who had grown too powerful. The colonial legal system was the weapon of choice. Colonial courts in Lagos were not built for justice. They were built for control. Land ownership disputes were handled in courts, where the judges were British, the law was British, and the institutional sympathy almost always lay with the European commercial interests. African merchants who had built their wealth over decades found themselves in cases they could not win. Property that had been in families for generations was reclassified under new colonial ordinances. Trade monopolies negotiated under one set of rules suddenly violated new regulations. The wealth of the Lagos merchant class did not simply evaporate, it was systematically redirected. And when an African merchant became particularly prominent, politically outspoken, commercially dominant, so influential to manage quietly, the mechanisms of erasure were set in motion. Records went missing, business dealings were scrutinized under regulations that had not existed 5 years before. Reputations were quietly dismantled. This is the environment in which Richard Beale Blaize would meet his end. Richard Beale Blaize died on the 21st of September 1904. He was 58 years old, and by the standards of the extraordinary life he had led, the death and what followed it was remarkably quiet. Historians who had studied the merchant class of colonial Lagos had noted a consistent, troubling pattern. Many court records from his era, particularly those involving land disputes and estate settlements of prominent African merchants, are simply no longer in the archives. Not misplaced, not damaged, gone. When a man of Blaize's stature dies, there should be a paper trail, estate inventories, property transfers, probate proceedings, financial settlements. Instead, gaps. Deliberate looking absence in the colonial record that conveniently prevent us from understanding exactly how much wealth Blaize accumulated and what happened to it upon his death. An empire does not simply evaporate in 10 years, nor without help. Blaize was not alone. To understand his story fully, you have to place it within a much wider pattern, one that played out across West Africa throughout the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Take Chief Daniel Conrad Taiwo, known as Taiwo Oluwo. His name literally means Taiwo the Rich Man. He rose from slavery to become one of the most powerful commercial and political brokers in colonial Lagos. A trader, an arms dealer, a political kingmaker, he died in 1901, reportedly one of the wealthiest men in Lagos. Within a generation, that wealth was gone from public record. Take James Penson Labulo Davis, described by contemporaries as the richest man on the entire West African coast, a man with personal connections to the British royal family, a man who owned merchant ships and whose Lagos real estate holdings were among the most significant of the era. His commercial legacy almost completely absent from popular history. So was Richard Beale Blaize a victim? The evidence, taken in full, says yes. Not of a single dramatic act, no assassin's bullet, no midnight arrest, but of something perhaps more insidious.